know, an F2 season, or rather GP2 season, that I've never really seen folk speaking about, and I feel like we should. Stoffel Vandoorne in 2015. Now, up until here, Vandoorne had a pretty solid junior Formula career. Champion in his first season as single-seaters in the 2010 F4 Euro Cup 1.6 series. In 2011, he claimed third in the Formula Renault 2-litre Northern European Cup and fifth in the Euro Cup Formula Renault series, which he then took the title in the following year in 2012. 2013 saw the Belgian claim the runner-up place in his rookie year of the Formula Renault 3.5 series, and he did the same in 2014 in GP2. So he came into the 2015 GP2 season as the highest placed returning driver and the reigning vice champion. And from that, you naturally expect him, still driving for ART as he'd done in 2014, to be a factor in the championship fight. And he made his intentions of just try stop me from taking the championship clear from the off. Pole by 3/10, feature race win plus the fastest lap, sprint race finish of P2 after starting P8, because the reverse grid for the top 8. In the feature race, he dropped to P10 when he'd finally made his pit stop on lap 22, and from there, with the rest of those still to pit also stopping, Vandoorne made his way back up to the top positions on fresher tyres, and even though with 4 laps less, Vandoorne was 9 seconds behind race leader Alexander Rossi, Rossi ended up coming face to face with the one thing that no racing driver ever wants to face: the dreaded tyre cliff. His tyres fell off, and Vandoorne with fresher rubber ended up catching him, passing him, and winning by a solid 5 seconds. At round 2 in Spain, it was a repeat of round 1 with another pole converted to a win for the feature race, but minus the fastest lap, as that came his way in the sprint race instead, which was another second place finish. So we're only 2 runs into the season, and Vandoorne has already made his intentions crystal clear with a commanding early lead in the championship of 37 points ahead of Rio Haryanto in P2. And the gap would only grow in Monaco. Vandoorne lined up 4th on the grid for the feature race, and after a few delays for a GP2 GP2ing, some things never change, the race finally got underway. Vandoorne didn't really make much headway to begin with, only gaining places after Marcello pitted for the lead on lap 7 and then pick a lap later from 3rd. And that released both Rossi into the lead and Vandoorne up to 2nd. The Belgian managed to close up to Rossi, the pair still yet to stop, and that was the state of play, until Evans and Yellowly made contact and it brought out the virtual safety car. And naturally, both Rossi and Vandoorne jammed for the cheap pit stop, along with a few others, and then it became a matter of who would come out first, which pit crew would be better. And when it all worked out with those VSE stops, the car emerging with the lead was not Alexander Rossi, but it was instead Stoffel Vandoorne who got out first. And that was that. From there, Vandoorne managed to keep the lead and took his 3rd win of the year. From a P8 start, he claimed a P8 finish in the sprint and got another 2 points for setting the fastest lap of the point scoring drivers. So in short, he extended his lead from 37 points to 44 points. A lead of almost the maximum points a driver could score in a weekend. And he almost doubled his lead of weekend 4 in Austria. Another win for pole comes his way in the feature race. He maintained the lead after the start and he kept the lead for a while, losing track position during the pit cycle. However, it was only for all of about a lap, because he managed to retake the net lead from Sirotkin a lap later, and from there, that was basically that, and he took his 4th feature win of the year. Then from 8th in the sprint, he roared back through to claim 2nd place on the finishing line. He made a great start and got up to 3rd by turn 3. Then he gained another place when on lap 14, Mark Love went for the lead against Haryanto at turn 4, and he ended up running wide and off the rod. And that's where he finished for 2nd place. And all this translated to a 76-point lead in the championship. Yeah, he really took the lead of the championship and then just ran. But the trend of constantly extending the lead would end at Silverstone though, which would arguably be Vandoorne's worst weekend of the season. He qualified 2nd for the feature race, but fell to 4th off the start, managing to just stay ahead of Rossi. He did go up to 3rd when his teammate Matsushita, who'd passed him at the start, retired on lap 7, but he then did lose a place to Rossi eventually when the American finally managed to punch in Makamov's stick for P3 on lap 16, but 2 laps later he got back up to 3rd when he passed Stanway. He lost a couple places through the pit cycle, but then got them back and got back up to 3rd, which is where he finished. And that would be his only point score of the weekend, because Vandoorne finished 9th in the sprint race, 1 place outside the points for his only non-point score of the year. He started 6th, but found himself 9th by the end of lap 2, but he managed to get back up to 8th on lap 6. However, That did not end up being where he would finish though, as I said, because Rowland overtook him for that 9th place on lap 18 at basically the same place Rossi passed him in the feature race, and that was that, 9th place. But it wasn't exactly all that bad for Stoffel, because he still ended this weekend with a commanding lead of 65 points to Alexander Rossi. Hunger came next, where a front row start for the feature race ended up with a 5th place finish, which gave him a 4th place start for the sprint race, where he aimed 2nd with the fastest lap. And that, combined with Rossi no scoring anything, even though Haryanto did score and moved back into 2nd place, Vandoorne still extended his lead in the championship out to 85 points. Vandoorne returned to his winning ways when the circus restarted after the summer break at Spa with a win from pole in the feature race by about 10 seconds. He did almost lose the lead at turn 1 to Sirotkin, but the Russian went way too deep into the corner and he managed to keep the lead. There was a huge shunt early on, and after a touch between Gasly and De Jong, which sent De Jong into the tyres rather heavily at Blanchimont, and once the race finally got going again, Vandoorne was down in 9th, but he worked his way back up the field with passing drivers and gaining places from others pitting. He had done so earlier, hence why he had dropped down to 9th, but he got back to the lead and he won the race. And then from 8th place in the sprint, he worked his way up to finish 4th place with fastest lap, which was won by Rossi, but put him back into the standings, 2nd place changing hands quite a bit here. But now he's got a 105 point gap to Vandoorne, with a maximum of 192 points left available to score in the season. That means that, taking 48 points off of that 192, after the next race in Monza, there's going to be 144 left available to score across Sochi, the second trip to Bahrain, and then Yas Marina. Meaning that if Vandoorne has a perfect weekend of 2 wins, pole position, 2 fastest laps, and his rivals don't score, he could mathematically end the Monza weekend with the championship in the bag. But of course it doesn't work out that way. But Vandoorne does have a double podium with a 2nd in the feature race and a 3rd in the sprint. And even though Rossi won the feature race, he scored nothing in the sprint. So Vandoorne still outscored him to extend the lead out to 108 points. It's after Sochi now where Vandoorne has another chance to wrap up the title. There's 96 points left available after this weekend for a driver to score, meaning that all the Belgian needs to do to wrap up the championship with 12 weekends to go is to really just head on to Rossi's coattails and not be majorly outscored by him. Finishing within 11 points of the American across the weekend will do the trick. Now the feature race, which Vandoorne started on the front row for it, was supposed to last for 30 laps. Keyword, supposed to, because it ended up only lasting 15 laps, because on the opening lap there was a crash which saw 4 drivers taken out of the running and it damaged the barriers and they needed to be repaired, so the race got shortened. Because of this, it ended up being half points for the race, meaning that instead of scoring 15 points for finishing 3rd plus 2 for fastest lap, it was 7.5 points plus 1 for fastest lap. His main title rival Rossi was taking the win this race, so it's a 4-point swing between them, with 269.5 playing 165.5 for a 104 point gap and 113 left. That left the sprint race then, which Vandoorne would start for 6th on the grid ahead of Rossi in 8th. If it were to finish like this in these exact positions like that, Vandoorne would be the 2015 GP2 champion. But it didn't finish like that. It finished with both drivers moving ahead 12 places to finish in 4th and 6th respectively. Not a podium for Stoffel, but I doubt he cared too much because 4th place gave him a 108 point gap to 2nd place in the standings, and with 96 points left, well, you do the maths, he'd done it. With 2 full weekends left, 4 races, Stoffel Vandoorne was the 2015 GP2 champion. What a season! As the title says, it was an incredible season. When the grid rocked up to Bahrain for the 2nd time in the season, Vandoorne repeated what he did at the first trip to Bahrain and won the feature race with the fastest lap, but not from pole, and then he had a 2nd place finish in the sprint race. And then at Yas Marina he finished his title winning season with one last feature race victory, and that was the final point scoring race of the year because the sprint race ended up being cancelled from an opening lap crash because the barriers couldn't be fixed in time to restart it. In the end, the season came to a close with Stoffel Vandoorne on 341 points to Alexander Rossi finishing in 2nd as the vice champion on 181.5, a gap of 160 points. 160. I am fairly certain that has to be some sort of record for the biggest Drivers' Championship winning margin in the second tier. It's a shame that Formula 1 never quite worked out for him, but at least Vandoorne has managed to land on his feet elsewhere and has still managed to have a fairly successful racing career post-junior Formula. He headed over to Formula E and WEC after he was done with Formula 1. He and his co-drivers took third in the 2019 24 Hours of Le Mans with SMP Racing and second in the LMP2 class in 2021 at both Le Mans and in the championship overall with Jota Sport. He also finished runner-up in the 2019-20 Formula E season, aka season 6, with Mercedes, and 2 seasons later in season 8, the 2021-22 season, he claimed the championship with the Silver Arrows. These days he's still over in Formula E and WEC with Maserati and Peugeot and Hypercar respectively, while also being still involved in Formula 1 as Aston Martin's test and reserve driver. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new around here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.